Welcome to another web development video where I'll show you how to do different things in web development. Um, Today we're going to be talking about CSS animations and using only CSS and just a tiny little bit of JavaScript just to do some adding classes and subtracting classes from other elements. We can create really smooth transitions that are offloaded to the browser, so these are not transitions that have to happen anywhere on the server or in a back and forth or even in the JavaScript itself. So we're going to be using two properties. We're going to be using the transform and the transition properties from CSS, CSS3, in order to move elements across the screen. And in this example, we're just going to do kind of a basic changing the background color over time, and we're also going to move an element from left to right, right to left. And I'll show you how to toggle that element. So if you've ever seen like a little a toggle element that moves back and forth, a little circle that moves back and forth for different options or to turn something on or off, it's going to look very similar to that. The goal here is to create just some basic CSS animations using the transform and the transition properties together. And then if you want to look through some of these resources, here are some of the best resources that I've found to be able to show you everything that you need to go farther with CSS animations, especially the transform and transition properties. So you can see a really good list of all the transform property values at the W3 Schools website if you follow this link. And I will put a link to this slideshow. So you'll have this link in here too. You could also find it here just by going to w3schools.com and searching for the CSS transform property. But it gives you a really good list here of all the different properties that you can use for the transform, or those are the values for the transform property. CSS transitions at Mozilla Developer Network is also a really good page, which gives you a tutorial of sorts. Talks you through what is a transition, what are they used for, what's the proper syntax for using them, what sorts of values and properties can I use with CSS transitions. And then this last one is a link to the DevTipsForDesigners channel on YouTube. You're obviously watching a video on YouTube. So maybe that's the best way for you to be able to learn things. If it is, I know that it is for me, and I've learned a whole lot from Travis Nielsen. He's the man who created this channel. He now is a designer at Google, but before that, when he was working for a smaller company, he was doing this channel where he was helping designers improve their coding skills. So he teaches lots of things like lots of HTML and CSS, but also like development, like a build system. He talks through some of those things. He shows you how to build, modern websites using a little bit of jQuery and then just modern CSS and HTML techniques. So I've learned a lot. His CSS animations playlist. In this video, we're covering essentially what some of the things he covers in the very first video in this playlist. But he's really engaging as a personality and very honest and very clear and a good teacher. So I know that I've learned a lot from his channel. So if that's something that you are looking for more depth in CSS animations, he shows you not only the transition and transform properties, but he shows you the animation property, and then he also takes you through some real life examples, what sorts of UI elements can and should you animate. So it's a really good series. One of the last ones that he did on the channel, he's taking a break, and I don't know if he'll ever come back and make more videos, but the plethora of videos that he has on there right now are really great. So you should check that out. All right, so let's get started on the project, and we're coming back to Codepen, and I have a little bit of a setup here already. So what I have is a circle represented in the circle div, and then I have a button here. I put a little wrapper on the button just so I could get it to center, but it's a button. Let's see, take this off. Get rid of that. And we have our circle styles here. So it's 200 by 200 with a red background and a border radius of 50%. When you put a border radius of 50% on an element, it's going to give it a perfect circle shape. Just down here you can see we're just aligning the button itself. So button wrapper goes 100% of the width of the viewport, and then it's just centering everything inside that. And then just some basic button styles here. Actually, we don't even need that. That was from a previous iteration of it when I was using an anchor tag, but I just changed it to a button element. Same here. Give it a little margin, a background, a color, and then on a button element you're going to get a border because that's a part of the styling from the browser. So if you just do border equals 0, then you're going to get no border on that. Alright, so let's get looking at what we need to do in order to prepare our circle and our animation properties. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a class that's called animate. And what we're going to do in the end is we're going to take whatever is inside, whatever the properties of this animate class are, and we're going to add them to the circle. So essentially we're going to take this animate class and we're just going to programmatically add it to the circle whenever we click the button. So when we click this, we're going to add a class here, and then circle is going to take on these new properties. So if you want to be able to add properties to an element, this is a really great way. So this is the initial state, and then this is going to be a secondary state that's created whenever we click this button. And in fact, we're going to use a toggle here so that we can add animate and take animate off on a click. So pretty simple jQuery. Actually, it's not very difficult. If you don't know jQuery, then the DevTipsForDesigners YouTube channel, he does a whole series on jQuery and just get you up to speed on it, and it's as good as any that I've watched before. So if you get a little lost with the animation, with the JavaScript part of this, I suggest you go over to the DevTipsForDesigners channel and just look up jQuery and just learn what he's doing very quickly, because you'll be able to pick up, probably just from watching that once, you'll be able to pick up what I'm doing. This is very low level. Alright, so animate. What we want to do is we want to move this circle 500 pixels this way to the right, and we also want to change the background color from red to blue. Now the way that we do that with our transition and transform properties is we're going to use transform on the animate property. So this is the thing that we want it to do. We want it to transform. Now the transform property takes all kinds of things. You could rotate this circle, you could skew it, you could scale it, so make it bigger or smaller. But what we want to do is we want to translate it, and then there's there's some values in here that we need to put. We can translate X and Y together, so you could say like 100 pixels, 100 pixels. So this would be the X-axis, and this would be the Y. So you can actually translate it across two axes at the same time. For our demonstration, we're just going to do one. We're only going to translate it across the X-axis, so it's going to be moving from 0, 0 to 500 along the X-axis and 0 along the Y-axis, which is vertical. So to do that, we can do translate X to do along the X-axis. We could also do translate Y if we only want to target one axis along the Y-axis. So this would move it down 100 pixels, and then this would move it to the right 100 pixels. Now we will actually want to go 500, so that's what we're going to do. I'm using Sass, by the way, so if you're not accustomed to using Sass, Sass essentially just compiles down to regular CSS. So you can use regular CSS if you want. Because we're using some newer properties, you can see that it's being prefixed here for WebKit. So if you use Sass, you don't have to do all the prefixes. It'll do some of those things for you. If you have a build system that allows you to do like auto prefixer or something like that, then that's easier for you too. So transform, translate X, 500 pixels, and then we also want to take the background color and we want to change it to blue. Now what happens is nothing so far, because these new properties have not been added to our circle. Now if we take this and we copy it and we manually put it on here, you can see that now we've moved our circle, we translated it along the x-axis, we moved it to the right 500 pixels, and we've changed the background color. So we want to not manually do that, but we want to programmatically do that in just a moment. But you can see already that it is animating, so it's taking these new properties and essentially just adding them to circle. So circle is taking on these new properties, and that's exactly what we want. So let's take this off. And one of the things that we need to do in order to give this the appearance of animation is that we need to use the transition property. Now transition means what do you do as that thing is changing. So we are clearly moving it 500 pixels to the right, and we're making a change to the background color. Transition says how long should that take, which elements should I be doing something with, and then what is the timing function. Should I do that all linearly? Should it just happen all at the same speed? Should it happen slow at the beginning and fast at the end, or vice versa? Or should it happen slow at the beginning and normal in the middle, and then slow again at the end, right? So there are some different timing functions that we have. So if you've worked at all with JavaScript animations, or you just know the general concept of animation, you're probably going to be able to get this pretty quickly. So anytime we do a transition, we need to put it on the element that's being changed. So right now we're adding these properties to the circle element, and the circle element is what's being changed, not the animate element, unless of course you added some sort of something to this animate element later on. But right now our circle is being changed, so that's the thing that we want to transition. So we want to tell it when the circle changes, what happens. So we need a property, we need a duration, we need a timing function, and then we can also set a delay. So if you want to set a delay on how long it should wait before it transitions and makes those changes, then you can do that as well. We will not be using a delay, so I'll just take that off, and let's just go through each of these here. The property is going to be here. So these are the properties that are going to be changing. Now you can see that I only have a listing here for one, but we have two properties, so I'll show you how to deal with that. So first let's just deal with the transform property. So we're going to look at the transform property, and when this changes, it's going to take how long for it to go from 0 to 500 pixels. Okay, so we'll just say 500 milliseconds. This could also be 0.5 seconds. You could write it like that. You can do whole numbers, which is 1 second. You could do 0.05 seconds. You could do 1500 milliseconds, which would be 1.5 seconds. So however you want to include those in is fine. And then the timing function, we have a few different things that we can choose. For me, I use ease the most, and that is equivalent to ease in, out. Okay, so you can use either one of these. Ease is just a shorthand way of saying ease in and ease out, and that's just going to make it go slow at the beginning, normal speed in the middle, and then slow down at the end. So if you think about like you're running in a race, or you're running from one place to another and you have to stop in a specific spot, you're going to start slower because it just takes you a little bit of time to get started. And then in the middle, you're going to be at your top speed. And then because you want to stop in a particular place, you're going to slow down so that you can stop in that particular place. So just think about animation like that. You can also do ease in, which means that you start slow and then the rest of it goes at a normal speed. You can do ease out, so you start fast and through the middle, and at the end you start to slow down. And there's also one called linear. Now linear just gets it starts at the same speed all the way through. So it starts at the same speed it ends, and then it's going to be at the same speed all the way through the animation. Linear feels weird if you're trying to create a particular, like gravity. Like if you're trying to think about gravity or you're trying to think about friction, linear is going to feel very strange. Linear is what would happen if you were in space. You would kind of push off and you would go the same speed all the way through because there is no friction, there's no gravity, nothing is changing and making that feel like a real animation. So there is a place for linear, and you'll just have to find it. But for the most part, you want it to feel like there's some sort of gravity and some sort of friction happening, because it'll feel more natural as an animation style. So we don't need this. We have our transition. It's on the transform property. So when the transform property kicks in here, then it's going to take 500 milliseconds to go from 0 to 500 pixels, and we're going to be easing in and easing out in the animation. I don't think it's going to show very well if I just manually add it here, but it might. Okay, so you can see that it jumps. Part of the reason is Codepen. Honestly, it's the way that we have this going right now. And it's because it's every time I add something, it refreshes the page, and then you don't really get to see the transition. So what we need to do is we need to programmatically find a way to stay on the page without doing a page refresh. And one way that we can do that is to create a little button here. It's called animate. And when we click that, we want it to add this class of animate to the class of circle, so that these properties get added to our div here, to our object. Okay, so we'll do that now. So let's take this off. Our circle will go back to its original state, which is background red, and then 0, 0. We haven't had to really tell it where to go. It automatically goes to 0 on the y-axis, 0 on the x-axis. We can also get rid of this now that we have our form down. And what we need to do is do a little JavaScript. And what I like to use jQuery. If you're in Codepen and you go to the JavaScript under the settings, so you start in HTML, if you click JavaScript, you can search for it here. And if you just do a search for jQuery, it's usually the first one that comes up. And so you can just click it. I already had jQuery being brought in from a CDN. And then you just click save, or I think you can get it through here too. So you can just add jQuery really quickly like that. So you can see there's some quick add. These are really common libraries that you can use to be able to add the JavaScript right to Codepen. So now that we have jQuery active, we are going to write a little bit. So let's say when we click this button, and this button has a class of button, so I'm just going to say when we click on the button, so the way that we do that is we say on click, we're going to run a function. So when we click the button, we're going to run some sort of function in here. So when we click this element that has the class of button, anytime if there were 100 buttons on here and we clicked it and they all had the class of button, then the same thing would happen. Whatever happens in here would happen. So on a click, then we're going to run this function. What we want to do is we want to take this animate class and we want to add it to circle. So we say we want to target circle, and we want to add class of animate. This does not need you don't need a decimal there. You don't need a point. You just type the word animate. So when we click the button, on the click, we should look at circle, and then we want you to add the class of animate to circle. Now this should give us exactly what we're looking for. We have our transform here. Now it's not going to transform the color yet, but it is going to change the color. But we're not going to get the smoothness of the transition in the color. So let's just take a look at it. And so you see we get the smoothness of the transform. So from left to right, you see how smooth it was compared to when we just manually added it up here, and it just changed the position from one to the other. It just jumped from one place to the other because we changed the position, but we didn't animate it across that change. So now we're kind of stuck with a weird problem over here, and that's that you know, every time we do that, it's adding the class of animate, which already is on it. But what we want to do is we want to take that class off so that it'll move back, and then we can also, it will also use the transition whenever you take the whenever you take this class off, then that again changes the circle from translate x 500 to translate x 0. And so when that change is made, this transition also picks up that change, and it'll also transition it back. So you create a little bit of back and forth animation here. And the way that we can do that is there's something called a toggle. So we don't want to just add the class, we want to toggle the class of animate, which means that when we click this button once, it's going to add it on. And when we click this button a second time, it's going to take it off. And when we click it a third time, it'll add it on and take it off and add it on and take it off. So whatever this is going to add or remove this thing. It's going to add or remove this class. So when we click on animate, it should push it to the right. And then when we click on it again, it should remove the animate class and move it back to the left. Okay. So we have a smooth animation in our left to right. And it's really as easy as that. If we wanted to add the second property, we have a couple of options. The first one is that we can just copy this and put a comma and then add a new one. You can chain along as many of these as you want to. So we're just going to say background and we're going to change it at the same speed that we're changing the left to right action. So when we click it, it should be a smoother transition of the red to the blue, and you should actually be able to see it move to purple. You can see that little hint of purple when it gets here. So it's actually transitioning the color, and it's transitioning the x-axis. Okay, so another way to write this whole thing is to just say all. So instead of transforming or transitioning specific properties, we can actually transition all of the properties. And then with this one call, we can transition both the direction and the color. So you can see it's still, we're getting that purple color in the middle. Okay. The problem at times with this is if you're only doing one or two properties, is that it's listening. So the browser is going to be listening for all of the changes on this property. But we really, on this div, but we really only want to change two properties. So if you're only changing a couple of properties, it's more performant because it's only listening for transform and it's only listening for background. And sometimes you run into this where you only want to transition a couple of different properties. But let's say we also had a width of 300 pixels and a height of 300 pixels. And maybe you don't want to transition these particular things, because right now it's gonna transition that too, so that it smoothly goes larger and smaller. But let's say you didn't want to do that for some reason. You only wanted to transition the transform and the background properties. You can see that it got bigger really fast and then moved over, and then it got small really fast. So maybe that's the kind of thing that you need or you're looking for. You're not looking for it to kind of grow at a particular speed. You just want something to happen quickly and something to happen slowly. Then you would chain them together and use each of these. Or you might even put this out into a new, a new class, and then just add that class here, right? So then you can add and remove this one too. So you get the same effect, but you can do all on this one, and you get the same effect too. Okay, that's a little clunkier sort of situation. That's not exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so I prefer to use, whenever there's only one or two, I prefer to use not all, but to actually use the individual properties that we're going to be looking for. So I don't need that either. But that's really the basics of getting something to animate, either in direction, or you can animate the color. Other good things, animating the size. So for transform, there's one called scale. There's one called rotate, so you can animate the rotation. There's lots of different things that you can do, and there's lots of farther ways that you can push this. This particular pattern is really good for lots of different elements. Like I said, one would be like when you click this and then it goes over to a toggle, and so you're toggling back and forth between two choices, right? So this is off and this is on, and back to off and on. So that's a really common pattern. Also, this could be a menu button, like a hamburger menu or something like that. And then if this is off the screen over here where you can't see it, and you click to toggle it on, you can kind of basically see it here. So we can animate it onto the screen and off the screen. So this is a little bit reversed, but if you did that, then you can animate it onto the screen and off the screen. And so you could see where you could do like a slide in menu that would come because of a click. And then when you click the button again, then it animates the menu back off the screen, right? So there are lots of different uses for this like basic CSS animations. This is just one of them, but these are the nuts and bolts of being able to just kind of programmatically take a class, put it onto another class, and change its properties. The one takeaway is to remember that the transition goes on to the thing that is being animated, not the animation changes that you want to make. And then if you want to toggle them on and off, then you use toggle class. So you can put the class on and take the class off with whatever action you're doing, whether it's a hover or a click or a mouse down or whatever it is. I hope that this has been informative for you.